All right, thank you, Ed. It's my great pleasure to be here. Great to meet you. So my name is Nicole Riemer. I'm from the University of Illinois, and the next 3 hours and tomorrow for another session, I will take you into the world of aerosol particles, what happens after the combustion engine or the combustion process releases them into the atmosphere. And so first I want to do an experiment with all of you. Are you ready? Okay, so sit relaxed and take a deep breath in. Now you can breathe out. So you just breathe in 1 million of aerosol particles, right? So aerosol particles are all around us, indoors and outdoors. And so let's dive in. First, a little bit of introduction where I'm coming from. So Ed already mentioned I am from Germany originally, but I've been living in Illinois now for many, many years, and our department is called the Department of Climate, Meteorology, and Atmospheric Sciences. So there are a lot of people who really work on weather-related topics, severe weather, climate variability and change, different ways how precipitation impacts life on Earth, thunderstorms, satellite and radar remote sensing. And so I'm on the top left there, atmospheric chemistry and aerosols. We are about 15 faculty and 50 grad students and about the same amount of undergraduates. So it's not a small, tiny department, but also not a really big department. So I really like it there. And so a little bit about myself. I thought it's so hot, we need a little bit of cooling. I like running. I live in this house. This is my cat, and this is my husband, who is in mechanical engineering at the University of Illinois. And so I imagine you're coming from all kinds of backgrounds, right? So what's your background?
I'm from technological engineering, technology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working in hypersonics.
Yeah.
Specifically in modeling shockwaves in scramjets and improving mixing with air fuel inside the combustion. By the use of convectors.
And what about you in the purple shirt?
So I'm working on the soot formation and soot evolution inside the flames. And it's mainly using optical diagnostics and experimental techniques.
Yeah.
But we also have a lot in common with the aerosol field.
Yeah.
And we're using the SMPS for
yes.
particle size distribution.
And one more, maybe you right there, if you want to volunteer. Yeah, you.
So I study at the University of Michigan, and I'm doing research in soot formation and hydrocarbon buildup in heat exchangers for waste heat recovery.
So I'm hearing a lot of soot formation, combustion. Obviously, this is the summer school about combustion. Not many people have maybe thought about the atmosphere and how the atmosphere is structured. So this is kind of like a little atmosphere 101. One thing to point out, no matter if you are from Europe and are thinking in kilometers, or if you are from the US thinking in miles, look at the scale here, 60 miles, 90 kilometers. How far is New York City from here? Is it about 60 miles? Yes, just about. So above this is space, right? So space is really close. So the atmosphere is actually really thin if you think about it, right? It's only 60 miles, about 100 kilometers. And so we structure the atmosphere into these layers, and the layers are basically determined by the temperature profile, right? So from the surface, if we go up, the temperature first decreases until we hit the what we call the tropopause. And then the temperature profile turns around, right? It stays fairly constant for a little while, and then it increases the temperature, and then it turns around again and it decreases. And so this sort of like determines the layering of the atmosphere that we are talking about. So at the bottom is the troposphere, then comes the stratosphere, then the mesosphere, and then eventually the thermosphere, and then we are in space. And so the weather that my department is really worried about. It's all mainly happening in the troposphere, right? And so the tropopause is where the jets are flying. Maybe some of you are doing research in combustion of jets. And yeah, so I just wanted to put this into perspective. Does anyone know why the temperature is increasing as we go up? Yep.
Radiation is not affected by the clouds, so I don't know.
Radiation is part of it. It's basically because of the ozone layer. The ozone layer absorbs radiation, and that leads to this temperature increase with height. And so I always tell my weather colleagues, atmospheric chemistry is really important, right? So you have to understand what's going on with the chemistry to understand how the temperature is developing in the atmosphere. Okay. Now, what is in the air, right? So you probably all know air is mainly nitrogen and oxygen, but those don't do very much, right, in terms of atmospheric chemistry. So the really interesting thing happens once we go to the smaller, trace gases that are only present in really small amounts. And even here, so it's split up into, I should use my pointer. So nitrogen, oxygen, and then this smaller slice here split up into CO2 is a big part, right? And so you all know CO2 is a greenhouse gas. And then, oh, there we go. It's very faint. Doesn't matter. These smaller components here, even those are, if you think about atmospheric chemistry, not reactive, right? And so eventually, like the methane here, we are starting to get to something that actually does reactions in the atmosphere. So the interesting gases that I'm going to introduce to you in terms of atmospheric chemistry, they are not even on here, right? They are only present in a tiny, tiny fraction, but they are really important in driving climate and air quality. And your field, right? Combustion is a major source of both gases and aerosols in the atmosphere. Okay, another thing to give you an overview of what we are talking about here. So this is a movie that was made by scientists at NASA some years ago. And so what they did is they were running what we call a global model, so a global model of the atmosphere. And they try to simulate what happens to the aerosols that are present in the atmosphere. And so they colored them depending on what type it is, the aerosol. And so you can see there's 5 or so, a handful different groups. There's blue type of aerosol, green, brownish, reddish, white, and that's about it, right? Yeah. Okay, so I really like this movie because it shows us how the atmospheric aerosol interacts with the global circulation, right? So on the Earth, there is global circulation going around that is moving. It's basically like a heat engine, right? So something that you're very familiar from engineering. And so what happens is the Earth receives more radiation near the equator, and it tries to equalize the temperature gradient by basically moving air around and also moving ocean around, right? And so this gives rise to these very characteristic circulations. And so on the one hand, we have the, do I have a mouse here? Can you see this? No. The westerly flow in the mid-latitudes, so right here and here. And so these are fairly strong winds. And so what happens is these winds are basically bringing sea salt aerosols in the atmosphere. So the blue-ish type of aerosol that you see there is representing sea salt aerosol. And then if we go to lower latitudes, the direction changes, right? So it's going westerly right here. And then if we go to lower latitudes, closer to the equator, it turns around and we have these easterly flows right there. And so there's a big source of aerosol right here, the desert of the Sahara, that emits aerosols, and they're actually traveling. It's a little bit complicated. You have these circulations here, but there's this flow going this way, right? And one interesting thing about this is that the Saharan aerosol that comes from the desert and is going over the Atlantic, it's fertilizing the Amazon forest. And sometimes, for some of you who have spent time in Florida, you get these Saharan dust outbreaks, which you can actually see the dust from the Sahara arriving in Florida and in Europe as well, right? So I remember this when I still lived in Germany. Ever so often, the cars would look really red, covered in red dust, and so this is when we get one of these Saharan dust outbreaks. Let's do this one more time. Whoops. Trying to make it go again. There we go. Another, for you, really relevant source of aerosols is biomass, what we call biomass burning. So this is the greenish type of aerosol. And so there are basically forests being burned down in the Amazon, in Central Africa, and in Indonesia. And they also emit huge amounts of smoke and aerosols into the atmosphere. And then the last type is what's colored here in white, is basically anthropogenic emissions, right? So by our daily activities, burning things, essentially, we are emitting lots of aerosols, and you can see Europe here as a big source, Asia, but also the US. And this aerosol is transported around the world with this global circulation. Yeah, so that's an overview about the atmospheric aerosol on a global scale. On a much smaller scale, I dug out, this is actually a figure from my dissertation many, many years ago. So this is a cross-section through an area in Germany. And so this is the Rhine Valley. I don't know, is anyone from Germany? No, but you know the Rhine Valley, it's right here. And so this is a little mountainous area. This is the Black Forest, and these are the Vosges Mountains in France. And so if you go there, there's a big autobahn along the Rhine Valley, and it's many cars are driving there very fast, right, in German autobahns. So this is this little plume of emissions, right? So they're emitting lots of aerosol particles, including soot, right here. And so you think, okay, that's the Rhine Valley. This is where the pollutions are, where the pollution stays. And so there's this wind coming. The arrows are the wind field. Let me see if this still works here. Yeah, so, but look at this. So there is this circulation in the Rhine Valley that basically transports the aerosol up into the mountainous area. And so it degrades visibility and all the rest of it. So the main point is the pollution, where it's produced, it doesn't stay there, right? It's being transported on the mesoscale, what we call this, and on a regional scale, but of course also on the global scale all around. Okay, and so from this global viewpoint, let's zoom in a little bit. I'm sure you've seen pictures like this before, but just to give you a perspective, so this thing here is a hair. And so hair, human hair are on the order of 17 micrometer in thickness. And so you can see these aerosol particles are really, really tiny, right? And so that's a mixture of different types. I just wanted to show you, they come in different shapes, right? Different sizes, different shapes. Sometimes they are little spheres, which, by the way, I'm a modeler, so I really like spherical particles because they make things easy. But we have to acknowledge your combustion particles are actually very complicated, right? So here we have like a soot agglomerate, which consists of also little spheres, but they are stuck together to form this kind of flaky structure. And then other types of aerosols have different shapes. A sea salt particle, you've seen the sea salt being transported around, right? If you dry them out, they actually form these little cubes, and so on. Okay, and so as we are going through this introduction here, one thing, these three things I want to get across here. So how do aerosols affect our daily lives? And then a little bit later, why is it challenging to quantify these impacts? Why are we struggling so much? And then how are we approaching this problem? I want to show you a few tools and what we are working on. Okay, how do aerosols impact our lives? So a few impressive visuals just to collect a few examples here. So dust storms are really dangerous, right? So they degrade the visibility, and lots of accidents happen. Actually, there was one in Chicago just recently. We don't have them very often in the Midwest, but of course in dry areas like the southwest of the US, they happen not infrequently. So that's one of the examples. Wildfires, they happen more and more often these days. So they can be seen from space, right? So this is a satellite picture of wildfires in Canada. So I could pull up many other examples over the last years and weeks, and they impact air quality, not just where you have the burning, but all over the US, right? So there are wildfires burning in Western Canada, and so the air quality on the east coast of the US goes down appreciably. Other areas of the Earth, this is the Ganges Valley in India, where fog and aerosols are collecting. And again, this is a satellite picture. You can see this from space. And so this plume of aerosols is transported over the ocean, right here over the Bay of Bengal. Then here is a picture, actually two pictures side by side. It's the same view out of a hotel window, right, on a nice day. And this is not a foggy day. This is a day with bad air quality. So these are aerosol particulate matter, where you basically can't see it to the other side of the street. And then the bottom line of this is air pollution is really killing a lot of people, bad air quality. It's not just respiratory diseases, but also cardiovascular diseases. So the particles, they get inhaled very deeply into the lung and can get into the bloodstream, right? So this is how air pollution or bad air quality is killing people. I don't know if anyone remembers this. It's now from many years ago, but there was this volcano eruption in Iceland from this volcano that is very hard to pronounce. And it really, the air traffic in the whole world came to a halt, right? So this plume was being spread out over large distances, and it's very dangerous to fly under these conditions. So all the planes were canceled, and people got stuck everywhere. It basically caused this big domino reaction, right? And lastly, so this is the area where I work mainly in, or big part of what I'm doing. Aerosols impact the radiative budget of the Earth, right? And so this can work in two different ways. So one we call the direct impact of aerosols on climate. And so that's just because these particles are scattering and absorbing the solar radiation, right? And like a very textbook example here is these volcanic eruptions. They release a lot of aerosols into the air, high up into the atmosphere, maybe even into the stratosphere. So you know now where the stratosphere is, right? It's above the troposphere. It's not only ash, things like ash, but also gases that get released. And those gases react, and they form little particles, and they are really good in scattering the light back into space from the light from the sun. And you can really see this effect whenever we have very dramatic volcano eruptions. So there were a few in recent history. So let's see here. One was the Pinatubo eruption in the 90s, and then the earlier one was the El Chichon. And so you can see this in the temperature record in the average temperature record of the Earth, right? And so this is what's shown here. So we have time on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis is the temperature change. So you have to imagine global average temperature change, right? So here is when, and always wiggles around a little bit, here's when this Mount Pinatubo erupts. It releases lots of these gases and aerosols into the atmosphere. It gets spread out with the global circulation, and it forms basically this, this umbrella or this shield where the solar radiation gets reflected back into space. And so after this, the global average temperature is lower than usual, right? So you get the negative deviations right here. And eventually, after months and maybe even years, these aerosols settle out again and are removed, and so this effect diminishes. But this also happens, you don't need a big volcano eruption to make this happen, right? So these aerosols that we are releasing into the atmosphere on a daily basis are doing that as well. Okay, and so the other thing, so this was the direct impact of aerosols on climate. If there's a direct impact, there's probably also an indirect impact, right? And so that is through clouds. So the world is a cloudy place. So this is another satellite picture of the cloud patterns in the atmosphere. And so how does that work? So if you go out and you look at the clouds, I don't know if there are any today actually, right now, but each cloud droplet that you see as part of these clouds formed on an aerosol particle, right? Because if you didn't have aerosol particles and you were just to ask the water molecules to spontaneously form cloud droplets, you would need a very, very high supersaturation. But we do have these aerosol particles in the atmosphere, and so this really helps to form this cloud droplet nucleus, and on that nucleus, these cloud droplets then can grow and form your cloud. And so now, what is going on here? So that picture here is comparing what we call a clean cloud, so very few aerosols, maybe only what you have in the atmosphere from natural sources like your dust and your sea salt, right? And then on the right-hand side is a polluted cloud where you maybe have people doing their combustion, right, as we do. So the difference between those two is, I don't know if you can see this, so the clean cloud contains big droplets and fewer droplets, and the polluted cloud contains many more droplets and they are smaller, right? Can you see that between the left and the right? And so what happens is the polluted cloud, because we are in an environment where there are lots of aerosol emissions, you have a lot of these nuclei, right? And so you have lots of sites where cloud droplets can form, but you only have so much water available, right? So you distribute your amount of water vapor over many, many, many cloud droplets, and therefore the average cloud droplet winds up being smaller. So you have more droplets, but smaller compared to the clean case. And so now you wonder, okay, that's interesting, but so what? Well, so what is if you do the calculations of radiative transfer, the cloud that has more droplets but smaller droplets reflects more. So it has a higher reflectivity. And so therefore, you can imagine as we go about our daily lives and emit aerosol particles and change, I haven't even talked about the composition yet, change what the aerosol population looks like, we are basically modifying clouds as we go, right? So it's kind of like a huge experiment, you could say, in cloud modifications that we do, if we want it or not, on a daily basis. yeah, so polluted clouds are more reflective, and so you are basically cooling the atmosphere, right? Because you are reflecting a lot of the radiation back into space. And one of the examples where you can see this very easily is when, again, you look at satellite pictures of, this is off the coast of Washington. So this is the Pacific Ocean. And in that area, it's very common to have these, so don't look at the streaks right now, look at the rest. So these are kind of low clouds, that we call them stratocumulus clouds, these cloud decks, right? And so what happens is there are ships going underneath these cloud decks, and ships burn fuel, and so you probably know a lot about that, right? Like how that all works. And so they release aerosol particles, soot particles into the atmosphere, and they provide these cloud condensation nuclei to these clouds. So they are modifying the clouds as they go underneath. It's kind of like contrails, but not contrails, right? It's from ships. Yeah, and so they enhance the reflectivity right there. So you see basically where the ships are going underneath the clouds by seeing these white stripes. So this is where the reflectivity is enhanced because you're supplying the clouds with more cloud condensation nuclei. Okay, so we will talk about this a little bit more as we go along, but I wanted to put this already in your head, what makes a good cloud condensation nucleus, right? Because not all aerosol particles are created equal when it comes to forming cloud droplets. Some are better than others. And what makes the difference is, one difference is the particle size. So bigger particles are better for making a cloud droplet, and also the chemical composition. So your soot particles, do you think they are good or bad cloud condensation nuclei? Who thinks good? Who thinks bad? Who thinks it depends? Yes. So when they come out, they are bad ones. Soot is not very hygroscopic initially, and so that's the interesting bit. As the soot aerosol is in the atmosphere, stuff happens to it, right? There are other things condensing, condensable gases condensing on the soot, and that can change their hygroscopicity very much. And I shouldn't say, it really depends what kind of soot. Like the wildfire soot is often coated with some sort of like organic, right? And that helps. But if you take like one of these really elemental carbon, very sooty soots, they are not very good CCN, cloud condensation nuclei. But as they are in the atmosphere, that changes, and that's something that kept me very busy for a long time, and maybe we'll have time to show you some examples about this. Okay, yeah, so actually I wrote it right here. So particles containing inorganic salts make better cloud condensation nuclei than organic particles or soot particles. So differences in hygroscopicity are the reasons for this. Okay, and so I just wanted to present you with this figure here. It's in the climate community. This is a very famous figure. Or these types of figures are very, we look at them a lot. And they're made by what is called the IPCC. Have you heard about the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change? Ever so often, or every few years, there is a new report basically compiling the knowledge, what we know about the climate and how it has been changing. And so this figure here summarizes what we call radiative forcing. And so that's basically splitting up from the forcing agents, so different things in the atmosphere like the greenhouse gases and down here the aerosols. They exert a radiative forcing, so they change the radiative balance of the atmosphere. And if you see a contribution in red, it means a positive forcing, meaning a warming. And if you see a contribution to the left in blue, this means those things are cooling the climate, right? And it's always between a pre-industrial state, so 1750 in this case, and the present. So I showed you here like the previous report, 2011. So in that time, the CO2 that got released into the atmosphere caused a positive forcing, a warming of this many watts per square meter, right? And the other greenhouse gases as well. And then we have the aerosols, and see it split up in, this is the direct impact that I mentioned, and here's the indirect impact, right? The direct radiation interactions, and here is the cloud effects that I just explained. And so those two actually are offsetting the greenhouse gas warming, right? So the aerosols that we have been emitting due to our activities have been masking the greenhouse gas warming to some extent. So you can imagine if we are cleaning up the atmosphere, which we are doing, broadly speaking, in the industrialized regions of the Earth, we are actually making this warming even more visible, right? So the cleaning up is good because it's, the pollution is bad for our health, but it has been masking the greenhouse gas warming to some extent. Okay, so that's how this figure works. And so now the main point here, yeah, cooling and warming. Oh, so one thing I'm going to show you, black carbon on snow, right? These are the soot particles that get transported way away from the sources, and they get deposited on the glaciers. And it looks like this, right? Have you seen pictures like this before? And so glaciers and icy regions on the Earth are also really important for the radiative balance. So they reflect huge amounts of light back into space right away, right? And so you can imagine if we darken these surfaces by depositing soot, sometimes also dust gets also deposited. That really changes the albedo. So that's what we call albedo, the reflection of shortwave radiation, and changes the radiative balance. So that's noticeable. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is, okay, look at these ranges here. I should also mention, do you think this radiative, what we call radiative forcing, can we measure this? Is this something that we can go out and measure? Who thinks yes? Who thinks no? Yeah, correct. We can't measure this, right? Because we have to go back to 1750, and even if we had some, you have to model this. This is something that comes out of our global models, right? And this figure is a compilation of many different global models that all try to estimate this number. And what looks like an error bar is actually the range of results that these different models get for this number. And you can see, okay, for CO2, there is a signal and there is a certain range, but the range is not that big compared to the signal, right? But here, with our aerosols and radiation and cloud interactions, the signal is, yeah, it's a certain amount, but the range is huge. So the models don't agree at all, right? What this number should be. So different models give different results. And yeah, so this was the report that came out in 2013, I think what it was. So the numbers that go in are 2011. There was another one, 2023. What do you think changed? Do you think they shrunk the model disagreement? No. It's still there. So the figure has slightly changed. They display this now differently. The aerosol is combined, right? Aerosol cloud and aerosol radiation is one bar. The other layout is the same. So this is this iconic figure that we always like to look at. But the ranges are still big, right? And so that's something that has happened iteration after iteration. we've been learning so much about aerosols, right? And about combustion and what comes out and what their properties are. But putting these things into a global model is really difficult. And so that brings me to this other concept I wanted to tell you about. Why is this so hard, right? So, okay, so we have our global models where we basically simulate the climate for the whole Earth, what's going on with the ocean and the atmosphere. And so we use this computational grid, and in each grid cell, we have lots of processes, and we do really the best we can. But these processes that we're talking about are on a really, really small scale, right? I showed you the figure of what aerosols look like on the order of a few hundred nanometers, maybe. And we will talk about what processes are actually happening. So all of that ideally has to go into here, right? Into one of these grid cells of a global model. They are on the order of 100 kilometers, right? So there's a lot of heterogeneity within that grid cell. The processes happen on really small time scales. There's a lot of chemical reactions, so it's computationally very expensive. And so we can't put all that detail in, right? So we have to make simplifications. And many times we actually don't know how to make these simplifications in a way that still captures the essence of the process. And so you have different choices to make, and different models make different choices. So this is how you wind up with a big spread, right? Yeah, so that's why this is so hard. Okay, and so for the rest of today and tomorrow morning, the topic of this session is basically how do aerosol models work. But I won't show you how to run a particular model or any particular numerical methods, right? What I want to show you here, because I mean, it seems like a lot of time, 2 times 3 hours, but it's actually not that much. I want to show you what are the key steps to go from the real world phenomenon to a numerical model. And so we first have to understand what are the real world phenomena that we are concerned with, right? It's different from, there are similarities to a combustion engine, but it's different, right? There are different time scales, different things, different assumptions that we make compared to what you are maybe used to. And so we will basically focus on the evolution of aerosol populations in the atmosphere. I want to explain to you what do we call the aerosol state, and then how do we evolve the aerosol state, and then how do we deal with this in models. And if we have time, we can talk about things like parametric and structural uncertainty, which is part of the reason why we have these big error bars, right? So both of these uncertainties play a role. And just to summarize this first portion here, so why are we using models for atmospheric aerosols? There are these major impacts, right, on health, on weather. Think about forming cloud droplets, on oh, I haven't talked about that. I have to mention this. Okay, let me come back to this. Climate and visibility. So when I showed you this figure right here with the cloud droplets, here. So I was emphasizing the impact on the reflectivity, right? So this cloud reflects more than this cloud, even though the moisture amount is kind of the same, right? So if you were to count the liquid water content of these clouds, it's similar, right? That's the whole point, but the microphysics is different, and so that has a big impact. There's another thing. If you think about clouds, they rain, right, sometimes. Not all the times, but sometimes they rain. So how does that work? So you have your cloud droplets, and then how do you get from these cloud droplets to rain droplets, right? So these cloud droplets are maybe 10 to 100 micrometer. And so rain droplets are way bigger, right? So what has to happen? Does anyone know that? Yeah. Saturate, yeah, so we are above, so they are condensing. We are condensing water vapor onto these cloud droplets. Is that all? Or is something else happening? Yeah.
Do they like meet with each other? They combine?
They meet with each other, exactly. So the first process, the condensation, gets us to a certain point, right? To a certain size, but it doesn't help us for making like the big raindrops that finally fall down and we perceive as rain. So to make that happen, we have to have this process called collision coalescence. And so this basically says the bigger drops, the slightly bigger drops fall faster than the smaller drops. And on their way down, they collect the smaller drops. So the big guys grow on the expense of the small guys. And then this happens while they fall, and it's kind of like a accelerating process, right? Because as they get bigger, they fall even faster, and so they can sweep up even more. Yeah, so that's how we make raindrops. And now imagine we have a polluted cloud with these small droplets around, and here we have the clean cloud. Which cloud do you think will rain more quickly? The clean one or the polluted one? Clean, yes, because here we basically spread everyone out so thinly, right? They don't fall very quick at all, so this cloud has a hard time raining. This one may rain much more readily. So, and so that's the other aspect of this, right? Not only does it change the reflectivity of the cloud, it also changes the lifetime of the clouds. So polluted clouds tend to live longer, and therefore they reflect, not only do they reflect more strongly, they also reflect for a longer time. Yeah, so that's how it is. So that's why it's not just climate, but also weather, right? So the production of rain. And we talked about these interactions with clouds already. Okay, and so when are models useful? So you probably are very used to, we know about weather forecast models, right? So you probably check the weather forecast. Okay, so that's a very useful thing. But also in atmospheric chemistry, and aerosol science models are really useful. And they tend, in our field, they tend to go hand in hand with lab experiments and also with field observations, right? So we have, I don't do this myself. I'm a computational person, but my colleagues who I very much appreciate that they're doing this, they go out in the field and they deploy their SMPS and whatnot, right? They're measuring the composition of the aerosols, what's out there, and together, by combining field observations and lab experiments and the modeling, we move forward in science, right? And so, for example, it could be that somebody discovers a new process or something new about particle characteristics. So an example could be if you have a mixture of different organics in your aerosol, they phase separate, right? So that could be a thing. And then you want to know, okay, this is scientifically really cool and interesting, but does it matter for the real atmosphere? Does it matter for these climate impacts? Does it matter for air quality? If you want to explore these questions, you have to put these things into context, right? Sometimes something looks really big and significant in the lab, but if you put this process into your regional or global model, for whatever reason, maybe these types of aerosols are actually not that abundant, or yeah, so it doesn't actually matter, right? So to figure out if something matters in the context of the atmosphere, it's good to have a model that we can try this out, right? It's basically like a synthetic lab where you can try out things. How does it manifest itself in the real atmosphere? Or something, an application might be you measure a really high concentration of something in a particular location. Where did it come from, right? So you can use a what we call a back trajectory model that sort of like figures out, did this high concentration of a certain component that might be harmful for health, did it come from this direction or that direction, right? It's hard to tell if you just have that measurement. You won't be able to know, but with a model you can answer this question. Or you can do it the other way around. You know that some area is emitting a lot of a certain substance or a certain type of aerosol. Where does it go? Where does your soot that was emitted from the German Autobahn in the Rhine Valley, does it go into the Black Forest or not, right? and what happens on the way, right? So these are the kind of questions these types of models are useful. Or the wildfires, right? So if we have wildfires in a certain location, where is that smoke? Where is that smoke plume going? And what happens to it? When does it get removed? Okay. So, but now let's think about what exactly do we want to predict. When I did my master's work, I was doing gas phase atmospheric chemistry, basically understanding how high tropospheric ozone episodes come about, which happens during summer. And so that sort of like, I mean, I had to learn a lot, but it's still, if you just do one phase, just the gas phase, it's relatively simple. You have for each chemical species one number, its concentration, and your task is to predict what happens, right, to these concentrations. And so you set up essentially a system of coupled ODEs, right? And then you predict forward, and that's it. And there might be a lot of ODEs, right? Or you have a lot of species. The system might be quite big, but it's for each gas, it's just this one number, just one scalar. Now with aerosols, it's more complicated because you have, if you think about it, there is a size distribution, there is mass concentration of aerosols, there's number concentration, there's different compositions, and there's different shapes, and there may be other things like, is it phase separated or not? So it's confusing, and so what's the best way to think about this? And by the way, yeah, so Ed pointed this out. This figure is sort of like summarizing a lot of things here, right, that we talked about. So here's your combustion and your other emissions, right? And all of these release particles into the air, and then certain processes are happening. For example, coagulation is when they meet each other, and they're chemical processes. And so that feeds into the aerosol life cycle. Eventually, they are removed somehow. We have to talk about how that works. But then this is coupled to the cloud life cycle, right? So clouds are seeding cloud droplets. And then something I haven't mentioned yet, it's not just liquid, right? Liquid droplets. There's also ice. So how do we form ice in the atmosphere? That's also really interesting. Yeah, and so aerosols are in the middle of all of this, and different people pick out different areas of this big diagram, and there's a lot of physics and chemistry in each of these little arrows and words, right? Yeah, so this is just a little summary, what's all happening. Okay, to finish up the first hour here, this is the point where now we have to introduce the aerosol state, and then let's talk about how to evolve the aerosol state. How does that sound? All right. Now I have to switch over to my iPad. You practice this. Ta-da. Oh. Did work before. I just have to, oh, she left. Maybe we need to wake it up. I can put it back and I can go on a little bit more until the break at least with this. Hopefully now. Now nothing works anymore. Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay, this is what we just did. Fine. Now I want to move to this one. Okay, so this is, if you were to sample the aerosol and bring it in and look at it with a transmission microscope, this is what particles might look like, right? So some of them are, this is spot the soot, it's this, right? And then others look more spherical, and they might have different components to them. They are mixtures of something. So how do we, it's all right, I'll continue for 5 minutes on, and then we switch over. Yeah, it's fine. How do we make sense of this? How do we bring this into some form that we can sort of like formulate equations? What are our state variables, right? So that's the question basically we want to ask. Okay, and so at the first,
It's just low.
yeah. First order thing that we do is we put the particles, we determine their size, for example, with an SMPS, right? And we produce these size distributions like this. Have you seen size distributions before? Yes. Everyone cool with size distributions? Yeah. So one thing that we see immediately, right, we have several orders of magnitude of sizes. So this is in micrometers, going from 0.01 to 1, so 10 nanometers, 100, 1 micrometer, 10 micrometer. These are the typical aerosol sizes. Oops. That we are concerned with. And so cloud droplets, since I'm working with aerosols and clouds, sometimes I have to switch. So clouds are over here, even bigger, right? And rain droplets even bigger. Okay, and so you see, if you plot a size distribution, you see these characteristic ranges, right? And so they have names. So it goes from the smallest, it's called nucleation mode, and then there comes the Aitken mode, accumulation mode, and the coarse mode. So these are the main size distributions. Oh yeah, and so main size ranges that we see in a size distribution. Of course, this is like a idealized schematic, but you see something here, what they did. So the top actually is a number size distribution where we show how many particles there are at a given size. And then most of them, so the small ones, there are really lots of them, right? So the tiny particles, we have many, many of those. We don't have many of the bigger ones. And so because this is a linear scale, they don't even appear, right? It looks like there's nothing, but that's not true. And so you see this once you plot the volume distribution. So this is how much volume of material you have at any given size. And so now the accumulation mode and the coarse mode, they show up. They were always there, but the contribution was so small that you weren't able to see them. And so similarly, the Aitken and the nucleation mode, they contribute lots of number, but almost no volume, right? So this is what this figure is telling us. Okay, so these are size distributions, very fundamental. And just a little excursion, how we produce them. So because there's one big important thing that happens. A size distribution is not just a histogram. It is not, please repeat after me, it's not just a histogram, right? Because what happens is with some sort of like measurement device, we might be able to measure in these certain size ranges, right, like here. And so in each size range, you determine the concentration of your aerosol, so the number concentration, right? And now look what happens. These size ranges are not all the same width. So, as you go to bigger sizes, because there are so fewer big particles, the size range is much wider, right? Can you see that this happens? Okay, and so now if you just report a histogram in these size ranges, this will be weird because the size bins are not the same size, right? So you might get like a skewed impression of where you have most particles. So what happens is that we take this number here and we divide it by the bin width of your size bin. And that forms this column right here. It's also concentration, something per cubic centimeter, but it's also per micrometer because we divide it by the bin width. And so then your data, so if you start out as a histogram, right, this is just plotting this first column, and then you divide by the bin width, so you normalize by the width of the bin, then the height of these, the relative height of these bars here, or of this line, shifts, and you get something like this. And this is why the unit is now per micrometer per cubic centimeter. Somehow this leads to a lot of confusion always. So I wanted to point this out in case this is, you run into this. Okay. So time for break, and then we will start with a little exercise after break, right? So now is break time, 15 minutes? Okay.